I have personally audited over 300 e-commerce email marketing accounts. And once you do enough of these Klaviyo account audits, you're no longer surprised because the exact same mistakes pop up over and over again. And these are not just small issues. They are in most cases $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 mistakes, $100,000 mistakes that are quite literally costing you, dozens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars per month or per year in revenue. For context, I run Rame Copy. We are a D2C marketing agency that works with over 70 direct-to-consumer brands. And most of the brands that I audit email marketing accounts for don't even know that they're making these mistakes. So I'm sure that in this video, I can reveal a few of those things to you and hopefully make you multiple tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in the next year through your email marketing using these audit details that we're about to talk about. So for this example, we're actually going to be auditing a live Klaviyo account that I just recently got access to. And we are going to begin with mistake number 1, which is missing flows. So as we scroll down here, we can see here that there are only 4 flows that are actively doing anything in this account. And actually these 2 are on manual, so they're not even live. Now, right off the bat, something that's sticking out to me is that this flow has 22 grand in revenue and all of these have 0. That's pretty interesting. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bounce over to the flows tab here in Klaviyo, and then I'm gonna set this status to live. And I can see, yep, there are only 2 flows live. Abandoned cart is the only one with revenue. So now I'm here in the abandoned cart flow and I'm gonna pull up statistics. And so now that we look a little bit deeper here, we're also seeing that this is actually an abandoned checkout flow, not abandoned cart. An abandoned cart flow would have the added to cart trigger. This one has a checkout started trigger, meaning the people who are adding to cart are not even getting a flow here. So as we scroll down, we see that email 1 has 2.9K in revenue. This is over the last 30 days. And then email 2 has 19.7K in revenue over the last 30 days. So combined 22K or so. Now this is interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this email, and then I'm going to click on view details. I'm going to go to recipient activity, switch this to converted, and switch the date range to last 30 days. And now while I won't go through every single one of these profiles, what's interesting is when I jumped on a live call with the actual founder of this brand, he told me that I forget which one of these customers it was, but one of these customers recently spent about 20 grand on a sale with them. And so it makes a lot of sense why that singular email is getting so much attributed revenue when, as you can see, there's only 2 people that have clicked it in the last 30 days. So right there, what we just pointed out is that in this account, 20 grand of this 24.5 grand is basically just from one person, meaning their email and SMS marketing is doing basically nothing. However, before I move on here, I also want to mention what the main flows are that are actually missing here, because again, the main mistake that I'm talking about here is just flows missing in general. So number 1, and the most important automation, is going to be your welcome sequence. That is the flow that is specifically for people that just came in through your opt-in form or any other traffic source that you have to capture new people onto the list. That flow is usually going to be your main money maker. And then we have 4 different abandonment flows that we run based on where they left the website. So that's going to be the site abandonment flow, the browse abandonment flow, the abandoned cart flow, and the abandoned checkout flow. And to give you specifics, I'm actually going to jump over to metrics here in Klaviyo so that I can show you which metrics I trigger each of those. So the active on site metric is what's going to trigger that site abandonment flow. And then the way you want to set up the filtering there is so that if they don't continue on and hit viewed product, added to cart, or started checkout as metric in the next hour or 2 after starting the active on site metric, then they would enter the site abandonment flow. And then the metric for triggering browse abandonment would be viewed product. So again, if people have viewed a product and in the hour that we're waiting, they haven't added to cart or started checkout, then they're going to get a browse abandonment flow. And then same logic, except for abandoned cart is the added to cart metric. And then as we saw before, abandoned checkout will get triggered by checkout started. So the next mistake that I see very commonly is deliverability just quietly destroying people's reach on their primary inboxes. So looking at the deliverability score for this brand specifically, they're actually at a 96 score. Now, this may be a little bit misleading because as we saw, they are hardly sending out any emails, but their deliverability score is looking pretty strong. Now, as some general benchmarks, I want to just set some standards here. For open rate, you ideally want to always be above about 40%. And then on click rate, ideally you're above 0.5 to 1%. Although with click rate, if you're sending more volume, it tends to slip naturally. In that case, we care a lot more just about the sales. And then we typically want to maintain these exact same metrics that Klaviyo is talking about here for bounce rate under 1%, unsubscribe rate under 0.3, and then spam complaint rate under 0.01. If you're hitting at all those and then open rate of 40% plus and click rate of 0.5 to 1% plus, you're in a good spot. If you're falling below that though, there are 3 things you'll want to check. Number 1 is going to be your domain setup. So these are your DNS records. Put simply, I have full videos on the channel about this, but you want to have a DMARC record set up. So that's DMARC. an SPF record setup, and a DKIM record setup. And then you want to be optimizing your content for good deliverability, and then you also want to be cleaning out the list of all inactive profiles on a regular basis. Once again, if you want more content on that, I have a full video going over deliverability best practices on this channel. Now, the next extremely common mistake that I see is sending out campaign emails on repeat to the same, list or group of the list in Klaviyo, while also just spamming discounts in every single one of them. So if we navigate over to campaigns for this client specifically, it looks like they actually have only sent out one campaign in the last 30 days. This one was just a test that I was doing. And if we look at the last 90 days, they have only sent out 2 campaigns in the last 3 months. So in this brand's case specifically, they're just not sending enough campaigns whatsoever. And that was actually the main reason that they came to us. But in your case, if you're sending campaigns out, let's call it 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week, maybe more, and you're just spamming it to the whole list with no segmentation strategy whatsoever, then you're making a big mistake. Why? Because the whole list is getting the exact same content regardless of how many times they've actually purchased from. So what I mean by that is we want non-buyers and repeat buyers to get totally different types of content from us, because non-buyers typically need a lot more direct response and convincing in order to get them to purchase, whereas repeat buyers or even just one-time buyers, they've already built some level of trust with us. So now we're just trying to stay in front of them in creative ways and get them to continue buying. Now, the last big mistake that I see in these Klaviyo accounts is simply you looking at and measuring the wrong numbers. So what I want to do, and this is a great example of this, is show you the numbers that actually matter in Klaviyo or in your email and SMS marketing strategy in general, so that you know what to look for and what to treat as, a reference or like a good thing to look at versus something that really matters a lot. So for example, this brand might look at this and say, okay, awesome, 34.4% of our total revenue is coming from email. That's great. However, as we discovered earlier, about 20 grand of that was from one customer, and that one customer may have even been like attributed to that specific email campaign. So this is the reason that we have to dive a little bit deeper. So anyways, the first stat that I'll always look at is the opt-in form conversion rate. Now in this brand's case, it looks like this opt-in form is at 0%, which is obviously not good. Ideally, your opt-in form is converting at least about 6 to 10%. If you're at least there, your list growth is good, you're in a good spot. And then we'll typically shift our attention over to the campaigns and flows. Now, first thing before we even start looking at the stats is we want to make sure that the campaigns have some sort of consistent strategy going on and that the flows are all built out, all those examples that I talked about earlier. If either of those two things aren't happening, then we just know we can immediately implement a real strategy, because most brands aren't even running a real email marketing strategy. And then boom, we're gonna see more revenue come in as a result. But assuming both of those things are in place, we want to look at campaign revenue versus flow revenue. Now, typically on a higher ticket item brand, so this brand, their AOV hovers between like $500 and multiple thousands of dollars, like we saw earlier with that 20K order. So typically for a higher ticket brand, more of the revenue tends to shift towards flows in our experience. And then campaigns will typically be a little bit lower. On lower AOV brands, campaigns, as long as your strategy is built out, will typically bring in more revenue than flows. But for the majority of brands, having like a 50-50 split between campaigns and flows is generally pretty healthy. So right here, what we can see is that obviously flows is very lopsided in comparison to campaigns, but like we saw, that's typically just going to be because in this account, they just had one big order attributed to that flow. And then within those flows and within those campaigns, outside of just revenue alone, we want to make sure that our open rates and our click rates are healthy, like we talked about earlier. Ideally, we're at least a 40% and above open rate, and ideally our click rate is above 1%, and that's as an average. Now obviously you can get much more in the weeds with all of these, and typically what we'll do is we'll look at conversion rates across each flow individually, the first email of each of those flows. We'll look at what campaigns are specifically working the best and to what cohorts they're working best, like I talked about earlier with the non-buyers versus the one-time buyers versus the repeat buyers. But with this, you have a good grasp on the high-level things that really matter, and like the benchmarks that you should be hitting in Klaviyo. Now, outside of this, the other big metrics that are really important to start tracking for the brand are going to be things that are just retention focused in general. So these are going to be stats like your repeat customer rate. So in a certain time frame, out of everybody that purchased, how many of those people bought again? Or tracking your 12-month lifetime value, or your 6-month lifetime value, maybe your 3-year lifetime value. If you're a subscription brand, we'd love to know how long people typically stay on subscription. All of those things become very helpful to know, because when you're trying to scale, it's really helpful to know how strong your retention actually is. And then that way you can compare your Klaviyo efforts, your email and SMS efforts to what's happening on the retention side. So we covered 4 main things: missing flows, deliverability that's not being monitored, a campaign strategy built on repetitive segmentation and discounts, and measuring numbers that don't actually matter. If you you fix all 4 of those, typically, in our experience, you can at least 2 to 3x your email revenue in most cases. And most of it, like I talked about in this video, is relatively simple. It's just a matter of actually executing it the right way. And because there's a lot of little minute details and, nuance that goes into building something like this, if you want a seasoned team that does this for a living, we're your guys. We'll pull up your account, go through all the data, and look through all the things that we specifically would implement there. That way you can see a whole custom strategy directly applied to your brand. Or if you don't want to talk to me and you just want more free content on how we actually think about email and SMS marketing as a whole, I have a video popping up on the screen here with a full email and SMS marketing course. Go check that out. At the very least, like, subscribe. Thank you for watching. Hope this is helpful. Talk soon.